Hello there, and welcome back. I'll start off by saying that this is the first time I upload a video like this, since I usually upload gameplay videos and horror story narrations. But I've recently finished Marvel Spider-Man 2 on the PS5, and I had a lot of thoughts on its story, and I wanted to share them with you guys. This is going to be a pretty long video, so buckle up. I'll start by sharing my thoughts on the story, and then I have a couple of ideas for possible DLCs that would further expand the story and also kind of fix some of the issues that I think the main story has, especially the last act. Before we start, I want to point out that this is going to be full of spoilers for Marvel Spider-Man 2 and its story, so you have been warned. I'll start with my overall story opinions and what I think was rushed and or didn't live up to its full potential. I think most of the story is good in general. I am, however, slightly disappointed by the third and final act. More on that later. However, I'm going to separate the story into more than 3 parts, since I think it better reflects the things I want to comment about. And even though some parts might overlap, just bear with me here. I'll do a quick summary of each part and then analyze it one by one. Part 1. Introduction and the return of Harry. Peter Parker, now a teacher at Miles Morales' school, faces an early challenge with an attack by Flint Marko, the Sandman. After this, Peter gets fired for abandoning his class and returns to Queens. Meanwhile, Harry Osborn re-enters Peter's life, having recovered from his illness, apparently, and offers Peter a job at the Emily May Foundation, referred to as EMF. Meanwhile, Miles struggles with his college application and his mother's new relationship. Overall, the first part of the game is great. The Sandman boss is an awesome introduction to set the tone and show off the new features and technological advancements of the new game. This definitely feels like a PS5 game. Harry's return is pretty well done. The flashback was awesome to see Peter's origin story in this universe, and it truly conveys the fact that these guys are best friends and they care about each other. So far, so good. I don't have anything against this first part really, and that's why I separated it from the rest, because it's basically an introduction. It's pretty well done. Part 2. Kraven the Hunter. Peter and Miles encounter Kraven the Hunter, who captures superpowered individuals for sport, including Scorpion and Martin Lee. Kraven also tries to catch Felicia Hardy, but fails. Peter and Harry work together, uncovering Harry's symbiote in the process, which at first they believe to be some kind of advanced exosuit. They attempt to rescue Kurt Connors, who is turned into the Lizard by Kraven, and escapes. So Kraven, I think, is a great villain. Very well fleshed out, and it's quite a fresh take on the character. He's menacing, seems like a whole different kind of villain, the likes of which the Spider-Men have never faced before. Throughout the story, he kills some of Spider-Man's fiercest villains, which gives him this unstoppable force aura from the player's perspective. Didn't really expect him to kill so many villains. His motivations also make sense for this adaptation of the villain, since he literally is dying and just wants to go out on his own terms, so he can't be bothered with the unworthy Spider-Man that won't decide to kill him. So he goes for the villains, since they show promise, and most of them are already killers. He literally sets up these shows and hunts in a sort of ritualistic celebration of both his life and death. Before moving to the next part, I want to talk about some negative points about this part of the story. So a minor one would be that I would have liked a boss battle at the beginning between the two Spider-Man and Kraven to show off how much of an unbeatable villain he is. It would have done wonders for the contrast of Venom versus Kraven later on, to help establish him as a scary villain even more so than it's already done in the game. A bigger negative point is the death of all of the other villains. Except Scorpion, they're killed off screen. So Peter's reactions are literally non-existent. It doesn't seem as impactful that we have this guy killing all these supervillains. They could have had missions of Peter trying to save his old villains from Kraven and failing. Like when you finish each one of the defending missions, he would see Kraven kill each one of them before his eyes. It would help with Peter's motivation and struggles to not kill him when he gets the symbiote suit. And they kinda implemented some part of this idea, since we had this with Black Cat, that basically the Spider-Man wanted to make sure she'll be safe from Kraven and she escapes. And we also have Miles that saves his nemesis, Mr. Negative, from Kraven. I think a quick mission for each villain and also showing their death would have been a great addition and also add to the impact of the scenes. I think this would have made the Kraven act perfect. Moving on to some more positive aspects, aside from Kraven, we see that Miles is forced to face the man that killed his father, and actually ends up putting innocent lives in danger because of it. I really like the direction of this arc for Miles, but more on that later as the story progresses. This part of the story also shows us Peter struggling with feelings that he's not enough as a hero. The way he screams, "I'm sorry," when he thinks he's going to fail to save a civilian in the roller coaster ride is just sad. Harry eventually helps him and saves the civilian, but we get a glimpse at Peter's reasons for wanting to keep the symbiote in order to be a better Spider-Man later on. Overall, even despite the few nitpicks I had before, I think the whole plot revolving Kraven up until his demise is a great adaptation of this villain. I'm happy we got to see this awesome version of Kraven before whatever Sony does with him in the movie. So let's get ready for that. Moving on, I also really liked Peter and Harry's Spider Pals team, since it felt natural for them to work together to save the world, not just with EMF, but also as heroes. They really did convey that these two people were friends, and Harry as a character was pretty good up until this point. So, in the end, the second part is pretty good, even though it has a few flaws. However, if the following two parts would have been of the same quality of the first two, this game would have been a masterpiece, almost perfect. Sadly, it is not, and we'll see why. Part 3. The Black Suit. Kraven almost kills Peter, and the symbiote leaves Harry in order to save his life. Peter uses the suit to defeat and cure the lizard. Over time, Peter is negatively influenced by the black symbiote suit, refusing Connor's warning to destroy it. Miles gets captured by Kraven and fights alongside Lee in order to help him escape. Peter, under the symbiote's influence, reluctantly goes looking for Miles and nearly kills Kraven, but is stopped by Miles. Eventually, Peter gets rid of the suit and plans to destroy it, as Connors instructed earlier. Okay, let's start by talking about Miles' boss fight against Lee, since I think it was a great boss battle, and the way he went from full-on trying to kill him all the way to letting him escape on his own was a great turning point for his character. I really liked what they did with Lee as Miles' nemesis in this game, given their history. This is also where I started feeling that the game was a bit rushed towards the end. Peter's black suit arch happens way too fast, both figuratively and literally, since it happens over the span of just a couple of days. I would have liked to see a more gradual change, have some time pass between getting the suit, getting influenced by it, and getting rid of it. I wanted to see Peter's villains being brutally murdered in front of his eyes by Kraven, watching his anger grow. Watch him lose himself while his best friend is dying because of his decision to keep the suit. Also, this game makes it seem like the symbiote is the bad guy and controls its host against their will. There are hints that the symbiote distorts the host's vision, but then they kill that idea off immediately with some scenes later on, when you can see the host being unaware and unwilling to do harm, and then the symbiote gains control again. This dilutes the idea that Peter would feel bad for his actions while wearing the suit, because it's technically not his fault. He was just being mind controlled. Originally, Peter's supposed to be responsible for his actions while wearing the suit, and this mind control approach kind of absolves him from that, taking away from the effectiveness of the story. Anyway, moving on to Peter, he does embrace the dark side one way or the other, and we finally get the Kraven boss fight. Peter almost kills him, but is stopped by Miles, and gets rid of the symbiote suit. Peter tried returning the symbiote to Oscorp, but was ambushed by Harry, and the vial was broken in the process. The symbiote went back to Harry, and even though last time he had the symbiote he was fine, now it just transforms him into Venom instantly. I know Peter was acting like a dick while Harry was slowly dying without the symbiote suit and such, but there's no major event that would have caused Harry to go from loving Peter to hating him so much. The symbiote can hate Peter because he rejected it, but Harry has no real reason. They tried to show Norman showing affection towards Peter and Harry being mad about it, but there was no point in the story where Norman was not being supportive and trying to save Harry, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. That's why I said we needed more time with the black suit, from a plot-wise point of view, to make Peter's descent into darkness and Harry's growing hatred towards him more obvious and justified. Overall, it just feels like the black suit part of the story deserved a little more time and polish, to make it as coherent and as high quality as the first two parts of the game. Before we move to the last part of the story, I wanted to point out a few quick side notes related to the symbiotes. Starting off with my biggest disappointment about the black symbiote suit. They should have allowed us to switch between any normal suit and any symbiote suit, like in the game Web of Shadows. We have the animation for it every time we use the symbiote surge, and despite the quick black screen we get when switching between symbiote and non-symbiote suits, I'm sure Insomniac could pull off a suit change in real time, even if it's at the expense of giving us some sort of cooldown. Let's say 10 seconds before you can switch your suit again, in order to avoid spamming it and crashing the game or something. I really hope they'll introduce this feature as part of the upcoming patch that they announced will include New Game Plus and other changes. As I said before, I want us to be able to switch in real time from a normal suit to a symbiote suit of our choosing. Also, let us choose 8 abilities, 4 for the symbiote and 4 for the normal suit. They could be the same if you wanted to, but giving us the possibility of having Peter use spider arms in his normal suit and symbiote abilities with the symbiote suit. Both abilities assigned to the same button combo, for example L1X, would share the same cooldown, so there's no danger of having 4 extra free abilities if you switch suits. You can use either the same ability on both suits or different ones for each. You want symbiote to use spider arms and the normal suit to have tendrils? Just go for it, but give us the ability to. Also, this would give us so much more depth to the gameplay aspect of the symbiote look. We get a normal suit with spider arms abilities, and then we switch to the symbiote and start using tendrils. Then, when the battle gets heated, we just turn it up even more by activating the surge suit. Which brings me to another point. I think they should also allow us to choose the Surge costume as either black Surge suit or the Anti-Venom suit, to better fit the colors of the current symbiote suit. Another lacking feature, which I think they will address in the patch, is the ability to choose the colors of the webs freely. I would like them to expand this even more by letting us choose colors for more things on both Spider-Man, such as the color of the webs, black and white, but also why not introduce other colors as well, such as red or blue. Also, I wish we could change the web wing colors, since we already have some suits with different colors. They could also have the cape suits use the cape in order to glide and remove the web wings entirely, but that could be tricky to pull off. They could also add recolors of the Anti-Venom, Symbiote and Surge suits. Basically give us black, white, and why not tease Carnage and give us a red variant for them as well. They could also use the animated series Venom shader they have on the original black suit alternate color. So yeah, this would be a nice and easy DLC since all the Insomniac suits, except for the Symbiote ones, have alternate colors. Going back to the story, I love that you can meet other vigilantes on random crimes, since it adds a sensation of living in the same world as these other heroes, and getting some more interaction between these characters, which is nice. I really enjoyed the Flame storyline, setting up Cassidy as a threat to Spider-Man even before he becomes Carnage. It went from a random cult of deranged pyromaniacs, reminding me of the Rippers from Days Gone, to oh shit, their leader is Carnage. It does get a bit obvious too fast on who the new villain is, but it's entertaining nonetheless. As for Wraith, I like the idea of her character, but I'm not really feeling it in this game. She's a cop gun rogue, right? Fine. But why is she some sort of superpowered ninja now? It's never stated why she's all of a sudden a match for Spider-Man, Kraven's hunters, or even symbiotes in a fight. She could use tech, guns, or something similar to make it believable that she's a threat to them. She does have her hooks on a chain, but it's never stated that she's a bloody Batman level martial artist. I'm pretty unfamiliar with her in the comics, so I don't know how she goes from cop to ninja exactly, but I do know that she uses fear gas, confiscated chameleon, and Mysterio tech and such. They could have included that, and more importantly, mention it, so it makes sense in the story. Despite this oversight, I like her interactions with Spider-Man. It reminds me of the Punisher's interaction with Daredevil in the Netflix series, where one vigilante is trying to stop the other from killing bad guys. I hope they expand on her transformation to Wraith in order to make it more believable in the future, since she's a very interesting character that's been with us from the start. That about sums up the side notes I had, so it's time for the last part. Part 4, Web of Shadows 2.0. Peter attempts to destroy the symbiote at Oscorp, but is intercepted by Harry and breaks the containment unit. Turns into Venom, knocks Peter out, and escapes from Oscorp security. Harry, as Venom, kills Kraven and plans to heal the world by turning everybody into symbiotes, starting with New York, of course. Venom also turns Mary Jane into a symbiote, and Peter has to fight her and help her break free. Later on, Peter and Miles fight the invasion, and Peter gets swarmed by symbiotes. Miles, with the help of Lee's powers, go inside his mind to help him escape the symbiote's mind control, creating the Anti-Venom suit. Lee apparently loses his powers and turns himself in. The suit also seems to retain Lee's abilities of hurting the symbiotes. Mary Jane helps the Spider-Man to recover and destroy the meteorite source, ending the symbiote threat. Venom tries to stop them, but Peter uses his anti-venom suit to destroy the symbiote. Miles tries to save Harry, and he survives, but falls comatose. Norman blames the Spider-Man. Peter takes a break from being Spider-Man, leaving Miles in charge, while he tries to re-establish the EMF from his own garage. Okay, so to start off, in this part we get to play as Venom, and it feels awesome. We get a taste of the power and sheer brutality of this monster. This blends perfectly into the scene where he kills Kraven. This is the perfect ending to Kraven's arc. Despite the shortcomings with the rushed black suit portion, Kraven's story was a big win from start to finish. This was a great send-off to his character. I really think they could have let us play as Venom more, even if not canonically. They could introduce a mission where we unlock a secret ability in the skill tree, and that ability allows us to switch to Venom by some sort of 2-button combo, for example, in the Switch Spider-Man prompt. Just let us play as Venom on the streets of New York at night, being able to do random crimes, and maybe even get occasional mini-boss battles against Wraith, Peter, or Miles. When Venom defeats them, they could just retreat, or have Venom just throw their unconscious bodies away into the distance, then carry on his merry way. It would be a fun bonus free roam mode, since they already have the controllable Venom implemented in the main game. Maybe they'll add this in the future update or DLC. Start off this part with a lot of potential. The problem here, in my opinion, is that too many things happen either at once or too fast. If you thought the black suit plot went by fast, this is even worse. According to Connors, Peter still has traces of the symbiote, and it's affecting him, supposedly because of the long exposure to it. It's weird that Harry never exhibits this. He's just concerned about his health deteriorating, since he never mentions hearing voices or any trace symbiote influence. Anyway, eventually Harry turns into Venom and goes after MJ in order to reach Peter and try to convince him to join his cause. He turns Mary Jane into Scream and leaves, leaving the two to do some symbiotic couples therapy on the streets of Queens. I really like this boss fight and the struggle that MJ and Peter talk about. However, I wish the game would have shown us that Mary Jane was feeling the pressure, didn't like her job and such. She just came across as worried that JJ would fire her, and about the article bad-mouthing Spider-Man. I just thought she was pissed at him for being a dick while wearing the black suit. And it's never clear that she hated writing a bad article just to keep her job. This could still be attributed to the fact that the last act feels rushed. It's not bad, just could have been better. Once again, the emotional impact of the fight is watered down by the game making it a point to give us glimpses of MJ asking Peter what's happening, and reiterating that the host of the symbiote is not responsible for what they do. Eventually, Peter gets through to MJ and helps her get rid of the symbiote. I guess there are no lingering effects, since MJ had the symbiote just for a short time, but it's never really addressed. Connors is just concerned about Peter, who spent more time with it, so I guess that's how it works. Peter and Miles go to the city hall, where symbiotes are taking over all the people inside and get swarmed. Lee saves Miles, but Peter is infected by the symbiote again. And Lee takes Miles into his mind in order to try to cut off the control of the symbiote. We end up with Lee losing his powers, Peter getting the Anti-Venom suit that also has a bit of Lee's powers to hurt the symbiotes. Now, this plot twist I have a few issues with. I like how they worked the Anti-Venom suit into the story in order to justify the player still having symbiote abilities after losing the black one. But it takes away from the fact that Peter came to terms that he is good enough as Spider-Man without the suit. Also, now he has all the power and no downside to the symbiote abilities. That's just too convenient, isn't it? Is he going to keep it forever? We'll talk more on this later. Also, it is never explained why the suit has no control over Peter now. Did Lee kill the sentience of the symbiote? Did it just cut off its connection to the hive mind and therefore Venom's control? Why isn't it Connors losing his shit over this new suit? It's just brushed over. Peter is okay now, has all the powers though, so let's just move on to the story. They should have worked a little more on getting the Anti-Venom suit arc to fit the story properly. Oh well. Meanwhile, Venom gets the meteorite fragment from Connors and promptly jumpstarts Web of Shadows 2.0. And this got me excited once again. Symbiotes are running free on the streets, infecting civilians, the whole city is engulfed by tendrils, nests appear, and so on. A promising sight to behold. However, it was short-lived and utterly disappointing, as there are literally only 2 main missions left at this point. There are no specific symbiote side missions, only a few nests that have no plot implications. Heck, they don't even mention them in the cutscenes except for once. Basically, you use Peter's new Anti-Venom abilities to save civilians in a few Go to Point X missions, before starting the last one. There's absolutely no substance to these missions. They're the same as random crimes, but with symbiotes. I think this was wasted potential of having more interesting symbiote invasion side missions during this part. Miles tries to destroy a nest with his powers, and hears Venom's voice as the symbiote is trying to merge with him and take control. He escapes with his Mega Blast ability. It's never stated or anything, but I assume his evolved Venom, since it was triggered by Lee's powers, also affects the symbiotes. Even though they kinda dismiss that idea when Lee says he didn't give him any new powers. But from the gameplay and the way Miles gets his blue electricity in reaction to Lee most of the time, I still assume Lee's powers affected Miles somehow. I wish they would have addressed the evolved Venom powers better in the story. Moving on, the final Venom fights were good, but didn't hit as hard as they could have. Miles barely interacted with Harry, so their interaction feels out of place and empty. I get that Miles wants to save his friend's friend, but they didn't build anything there, so it's rather shallow. I also think they messed up by not giving us a chase sequence, where we're being chased by Venom as Peter, and then fight, and before Venom pulls out his no wings, have Venom run away, trying to get back to the meteorite, and then have us chasing him as Peter, until he gets tired, fights Peter again, and then finally pulls out his wings and fly off. I think it could have been a very cool part of the fight. In the final part of the last mission, we have Venom just wanting to kill everybody, and Harry snapping in and out of consciousness, not being aware nor willing to do any of it. This just makes Venom feel like an evil monster, not a bond between two sentient beings with a strong bond born from a common goal. I don't think it makes justice to this character's depiction in the source material. Maybe they can fix this, so we'll talk more about that later on. So yeah, in the end, Harry's in a coma, Norman is going to turn either himself or his son into the Green Goblin in the third game, Otto's plotting the final chapter, Miles now has a girlfriend and a sponsorship from Adidas, his mom's dating Silk's father, and Peter is taking a break to pull a Bill Gates restarting EMF from his aunt's garage, and spend more time with MJ, who also quit her job and has a podcast where she uploads audio without editing it. Carnage is also coming soon, and Wraith's probably gonna be back as well as part of that plotline. So the story was good, but it also has its flaws. But it could have been so much better if the last two parts had a little more time to flesh out the story and the characters. When the credits finished rolling, I felt like the story needed about 5 more hours to do all of these plotlines justice. We had the resolution between Miles and Lee, getting the Anti-Venom suit, Web of Shadow symbiote invasion, the end of the invasion, Mary Jane playing Call of Duty against symbiotes, fighting Venom, kind of losing Harry, setting up the Green Goblin, all in the span of 2 missions and a couple of cutscenes. It just needed more time. I really wonder what the story would have looked like if Sony would have allowed Insomniac to release this game in early 2024 instead of 2023. Regardless, this is what we got. So before we move on, I wanted to make a quick note on the Anti-Venom suit. It definitely looks more cloth-like compared to the normal black symbiote suit. You can see the seams and the line where Peter's mask covers his neck area. Also, the lenses look mechanical, like a camera's shutter, similar to his normal suit. I wonder if Insomniac's take on this is that the remnant symbiote left Peter's body and got merged with the actual spider suit instead of with Peter, while still retaining its abilities. We'll have to wait for them to confirm or say otherwise, I guess, but that's just the vibe I got from the look of the suit. That being said, now it's time to set our sights on the future, and this future poses a problem for the next Spider-Man game, at least the next game featuring a playable Peter Parker. This is the Anti-Venom suit problem. Is he going to have the suit and the symbiote powers forever? Will he get rid of it willingly, or will he be forced to? Personally, I don't think Peter should keep the symbiote in the future. The whole idea of the black suit is for him to get rid of it eventually, because of the consequences it brings. Now he has all the advantages with no downsides. That just feels cheap, since it's just an excuse to give us the symbiote powers back during gameplay. Apart from the Anti-Venom problems, we also have another one. There are rumors that Venom would be back, either as a DLC or in another game. So how? Isn't the Venom symbiote destroyed? Is another symbiote gonna call itself Venom? Is Miles gonna keep that crappy Adidas suit? Please God, no. So, my point is, how do we continue the story and establish Venom and Peter going back to normal? So where do we go from here? I see two paths Insomnia can take to both deal with the Anti-Venom problem and have Venom return, and possibly turn into the anti-hero instead of the main villain next time we see him. Option A would be an easy, fast, and even safer way. One DLC, and even though I prefer the second option, this is what I think it's more probable to happen judging by the story so far and how they approach these characters and plotlines. I still hope to be wrong though, since I think the second option is more exciting. Option B would be a more fleshed out story with various acts. A hard but better way, let's call it, consisting of free sequential DLCs, similar to the first game's DLC packs. I think this is the best way to reintroduce Venom and have him stay in this universe for the future, while also dealing with the anti-Venom problem I just mentioned before. Tell me which one you prefer from the two. I'm curious to hear people's thoughts on it. So let's start with the possible plot of a DLC for Spider-Man 2. I'll go into the plot and also some gameplay aspects that I think could get introduced in such a DLC. Both options would start off the same, so I'll share the start of the DLC that is common between the two and then continue with each alternative option separately. We would start the DLC where the game left off. Harry's in a coma, Norman is busy finding a new cure and eventually turning himself or his son into the Green Goblin. Peter feels guilty about not being able to save Harry, even though he did what had to be done, so he visits him quite often. Peter has retired from being Spider-Man for the time being, so he just puts all his efforts into trying to build up EMF without Norman's funding, make ends meet, and focus on his relationship with MJ. Peter is still wearing the Anti-Venom suit, since that's how the story ended, and there's no downside to doing so. Despite not being active as Spider-Man at the moment, he just keeps it on, just in case he ever needs it. And this is the point where the two possible paths diverge. So we'll start with the shorter of the two. Option A, quick and easy. In this scenario, Peter is having a rough day, feeling guilty that Harry is in the state he is right now because of him. He breaks down and lays his hands on his friend's chest. Unintentionally, he causes the symbiote to slowly come off and engulf Harry's comatose body. The anti-venom suit is now on Harry, just leaving his face uncovered. Peter panics and calls Dr. Connors as Spider-Man. In an attempt to keep his identity secret, he said that he was just visiting to check up on how Harry was doing, and it just happened when he touched him. Peter covers Harry so the doctors don't see the suit on him and rushes out. Dr. Connors gets Oscorp's scientists to move Harry from the hospital to a private clinic to avoid media attention. Spider-Man talks with him on the phone to check in on Harry, since Norman gave orders for Oscorp to kill Spider-Man if he is seen breaking in. Harry's vitals get better, but in a cutscene we get a glimpse of Harry's mind, where we hear Venom's voice once again. As it turns out, there were still remnants of the symbiote in Harry, since he's been in contact with it for an extremely long period of time. The little bit of black symbiote merges with and corrupts the anti-venom suit, slowly turning it to black. So this way he turns back into Venom, but the anti-venom suit had been sanitized by Mr. Negative's powers, so it means that this time the symbiote is not connected to the hive mind of Null, the symbiote god. For those who don't know, Null is the symbiote god, and he has a sort of hive mind that connects all the symbiotes and uses it to give them orders and such. They use the symbol for Null on the meteorite and the symbiote enemies, so I doubt they won't have the symbiotes be part of the hive mind and Null existing in this universe. Therefore, since Venom is no longer connected to the hive mind, he won't try to infect the world anymore. Now to move forward, we could go with Venom focusing on getting revenge on Peter. But this is why I think this plotline is pretty weak if done with Harry, since he literally begged Spider-Man to kill him in order to stop the symbiote invasion. Therefore, the symbiote could hate Peter for trying to destroy it, but Harry wouldn't have a reason to be mad at him. Or alternatively, Harry's Venom would just be good now. That's how he becomes the Lethal Protector, but it just feels cheap and unearned. There's no character growth. Either way, they could use this as a plot for the DLC and have Peter and Venom be playable. Either starting off as enemies and Venom becoming good, or just starting off good as I mentioned before. Then in a second DLC, after the conclusion of this one, Miles could have a DLC with him facing hardships and being the on-duty Spider-Man, and maybe collaborating with Wraith as somebody who would help him from time to time. Even though I think this version of Venom and this idea is plausible, I much prefer the second alternative I mentioned before. So let's just move on to that. Option B, Extended Venom storyline. This story would be divided into 3 sequential DLCs similar to the ones in the first game, telling one continuous storyline. DLC 1, The Lonely Spider and the Reporter. In this scenario, one day Miles comes with Peter to visit Harry. He asked Peter for some Spider-Man advice and they just talked about it on the way to the hospital, since it was faster to just swing there. Peter gets pretty emotional, and when Miles notices it, he says that he's going to step out for a moment to get some air. Meanwhile, Miles remains there staring at Harry as he sighs and recalls when he resuscitated Harry, but he still ended up in a coma. A flashback is shown of Miles shocking Harry's chest, and then it switches back to Miles, lightly touching Harry's forearm, while saying, "I'm sorry, man." As that plays out, the camera zooms in on Miles' hand, as a tiny sliver of the black symbiote emerges from Harry's arm, and it slithers up Miles' long sleeve. He does not notice this, so he just says goodbye to Peter and leaves. As a side note, they could optionally show further down in the DLC that Harry's getting worse after the little symbiote had left, and maybe this prompts Norman to use a new cure and eventually turning Harry into the Green Goblin. If they want Norman to be the Goblin, they could just leave Harry comatose. But I feel that they left him alive for a reason, either to be Venom again, like I stated in option A, or the Green Goblin. Or maybe something else, we'll see. Anyway, during this DLC, we can only play missions as Miles. Peter can only be used for free roam and random crimes, and you can also run into him when solving random crimes as Miles. But all story missions are going to be done with Miles. So in this part of the DLC, Miles will have to face a major threat or villain, and he could collaborate with Wraith as his backup in the absence of Peter. I won't go into details or what villain I think they're gonna use and such, since it's a little irrelevant for the rest of the story. The main idea is that Miles is the only Spider-Man. Wraith doesn't really trust he's up for it, so she shadows him and steps in sometimes. However, there's a catch: the symbiote. The symbiote is weak, damaged, and basically siphons off Miles' energy to keep itself alive, since Harry was not really doing that great in the matter of life support, since he was barely alive himself. This happens gradually. However, in this state, the symbiote doesn't really have that much control over Miles. It just makes him feel more tired and slightly grumpy at first. Elsewhere, we find Eddie Brock. He was confirmed to exist in this universe by a farewell card Peter got from the Daily Bugle, and it's found in a backpack in the first game. We'll do a human mission with him, similar to the MJ or Miles missions from the first game. He is an investigative reporter, and since MJ left the Bugle, JJ has tasked him exclusively with Spider-Man related cases. He had a deep hatred towards the original Spider-Man even before this. As he works on a case to track and expose, as JJ put it, Spider-Man's misdeeds, he recalls an old case from back when he worked for the Daily Globe. He interviewed Emil Gregg, who was giving anonymous interviews to Eddie, when he believed he himself was a serial killer known as the Sin Eater. He recalled hearing voices telling him to do it, or at least he thought he did. This was Brock's big break, so he didn't spend too much time confirming these claims and published the story as the highlight of his editorial career, getting Emil arrested. Spider-Man eventually caught the real Sin Eater, either alone or assisted by another vigilante known as the Devil of Hell's Kitchen, depending on how much Insomniac wants to confirm Daredevil was existent at this point. And it was Stan Carter. Brock was exposed as a fraud and fired from the Daily Globe. His wife left him, his father disowned him, and that drove Eddie to some dark thoughts, and created a deep hatred for Spider-Man as he blamed him for destroying his career, even though it was technically his own fault. This idea adapts his origin story from the comics, before the animated TV series changed it forever in the public eye, and I think it works better as it also fits with Eddie still hating Spider-Man and still working at the Bugle as Peter's friend, or at least he's on good terms with Peter, as seen from the collectible card in the first game. Despite his hatred for Spider-Man, Brock avoided focusing on him too much, since he preferred the more down-to-earth cases for his articles, rather than supervillains and such. However, ever since MJ quit, there was no escaping it. Now he was tackling not one, but two Spider-Man cases, and he was not happy about it. The young one was pretty easy to spot, but ever since the incident with the black suit, Brock had a hard time finding any leads on the original Spider-Man. That intrigued him, so he focused more on finding out what he's up to. There were some very incriminating rumors about Spider-Man and his new suit, so maybe he could find some dirt on him, or even better yet, find out who he is and expose him. The idea of exposing Spider-Man after his rampage with the black suit felt like karmic justice, since he was the one that ruined Brock's career and personal life. Or at least that's what Brock thinks. Eddie will appear in cutscenes throughout the DLC, investigating what Miles was doing, taking a loose picture here and there, and whenever he talked to somebody as Spider-Man, he would write it down. Basically, we'll feel his presence throughout the story, even if it's not in a gameplay capacity. Meanwhile, Miles' powers start acting up due to the symbiote leeching energy from him. He also shows a more aggressive predisposition with his friends, family, and even the criminals he fights. At one point, Genki has to talk Miles down over the phone in order to get him to stop hitting some random thugs so hard, since he was afraid he might kill them in the process. Here we also get some new powers at this point in the DLC. The symbiote alters his electrical powers slightly. His Mega Venom Blast is replaced by the Venom Surge, as minor black and red veins cover Miles' costume as the suit pulses with red energy, and he also gets a few unique powerful electric attacks, similar to Peter's symbiote surge attacks, that insta down some enemies before running out. This new special ability is the way the symbiote leeches off Miles' powers, and it continuously drains his life bar until it either runs out or the player manually stops it by pressing the button combination again. Just like in the main game, he'll gain alternate abilities to each L1 button combinations with these new red lightning powers that gives him more power at the cost of a percentage of the life bar. During the game you can upgrade it so it can reduce a full focus bar instead, for the player to be at a less disadvantage when using it. After the final boss fight against the villain, Miles just collapses next to his defeated foe. Wraith appears to take him away before the authorities got to them, expressing concern to Miles' ally that's on the phone with him. The first DLC ends with Rio, Genki and Hailey worried about Miles as he slept for various days straight. Eddie Brock sees some part of the event unfold, and once Wraith leaves, he remains hidden, stalking Miles, as Genki and Rio come rushing in to take him home. Eddie overhears Rio calling his son by name, and Genki also panically shouting that they need to contact Peter immediately. Rio protests since the threat of the villain has been dealt with, and they shouldn't disturb Peter just yet. Eddie is intrigued by this revelation, and writes it down as he walks away from the scene. And this concludes the first DLC. DLC 2. No Rest for the Wicked Spider. Peter notices a spike in criminal activity and tries calling Miles numerous times with no success. He wants to swing over to check in on him, but the police radio scanner's static breaks the silence in his garage, alerting him of a pretty urgent crime unfolding in the city. He rushes out, and the Anti-Venom suit manifests out of nowhere, changing him into the white suit. This is when the player gets control of Peter and starts solving some random crimes for a while until the story progresses further. Peter retains all the abilities we had in the main game for now. However, in a side mission, he encounters some of the Flame's leftover followers, and he realizes that the Anti-Venom suit is not immune to fire, unlike the original black suit that Harry and Peter wore before. This will be important for later on in the story. Peter also points this out during gameplay in random crimes featuring the Flame's pyromaniacs whenever he takes fire damage. Meanwhile, Eddie is seen staring at a makeshift evidence board scattered with pictures of the Spider-Man and Miles, along with his family and friends, including Peter Parker. His first name, Peter, is underlined with a red marker and a question mark next to it. Is he Spider-Man? Eddie ponders as he grabs Peter's picture, recalling the dorky kid that worked at the Bugle with him for so many years. The sense of hatred for Spider-Man grows, but he also feels conflicted after realizing that this apparently likable and innocent young man could be the one who ruined his life. He crumples the picture of Peter and throws it on the ground as he grabs his coat and storms out of the room. After taking care of some of the major crimes going on in the city, Peter finally gets a call from Rio, informing him that Miles has been acting distant and even seems unwell ever since his fight with the villain from the previous DLC. She tells Peter he won't talk about it and just stormed off wearing his suit. Peter gets the main objective to find Miles. At this point, you can also play as Miles, and just like in the first DLC, you can only do random crimes as Miles at this point. Eddie is shown taking notes and listening to Danika's and GJ's podcasts, informing the people of New York that the original Spider-Man has returned after a slight absence. Meanwhile, Peter uses the police scanner to find Miles and investigate some crimes he had stopped along the way before finally finding him at the top of the still damaged Roxxon Plaza building, staring at the spot where the Newfound reactor was in his spin-off game. It's midnight at this point in the DLC. Miles looks sick and acts distant and unresponsive to Peter's concerns and nice words. In an attempt to reassure him, Peter touches his shoulder as a surge of the symbiote emerges from Miles' suit and attaches itself to Peter's Anti-Venom suit. This causes Peter to start screaming in pain as the suit starts acting out, the black and white symbiote continuously moving, similar to Rorschach's mask stain from The Watchmen. Miles tries to help Peter, but the symbiote is slowly taking control of him, shouting in Tony Todd's voice, "Stay away from us," and Peter swings away as Miles chases off after him. The player now controls Miles. However, before he could catch up to Peter, some followers of the Flame jump him and starts a fight. The player is introduced to web-based abilities instead of the Venom abilities now, since Miles is weak from the symbiote leeching on his powers for so long. He tries to use his Venom powers but fails, so he adjusts his web shooters and gets ready to web up some enemies. These web abilities are as follows. L1 triangle has Spider-Man doing a quick slingshot, propelling himself with a strong kick into an enemy at a distance, hitting and stunning any enemies in his path. The last enemy gets hit with the most power. L1 square. Spider-Man fires a couple of impact webs from the first game, instantly shoving enemies away and webbing them to the wall or ground. Then we have L1 Cross, a web-based crowd control ability. Spider-Man webs up multiple enemies, similar to the symbiote yank, and yanks some of them into the ground and some into the left and right directions. Then we have L1 Circle, which yanks multiple enemies towards the player, similar to Miles' Reverse Flux Venom ability. Then we have the special ability activated by L3 and R3, where they could reuse the Web Blossom for the first game instead of the Surge or Mega Blast. These abilities could be upgraded and improved with skill points later on. As we see, the roles have changed now, and Miles has to find Peter. He does so a couple of times, and after each fight with Peter, the symbiote changes more and more, turning from black and white Rorschach pattern that was more or less 80% white and 10% black, to 50% of each color, then more black than white, and eventually the suit takes on the Surge symbiote suit form again. These changes have the Spider-Man make their way from Harlem all the way to the top of a building facing the Trinity Church. Eddie also hears some chatter that the original Spider-Man has been spotted fighting with the younger one near Trinity Church, so he's heading there as well. Once he reaches the church, he decides to climb its tower to get a better view of the action and hopefully spot the two Spider-Men. Miles' Venom powers don't work, and the web abilities are no match for the black suit, so he relies on the Sonic Burst gadgets. The symbiote is going crazy because of the blasts and grabs Miles as he tries to throw a couple more Sonic Bursts, as the Venom symbiote crushes the gadgets in Miles' hands, disabling the gadget for the player for the rest of this fight. Miles' only idea is to slingshot himself and hit Peter as hard as he can, aiming for them to break into the Trinity Church bell tower, where the fight continues. The player has the option to use the church's bells to gain the upper hand against Peter. The damage from them falling breaks the stairs Eddie was currently climbing and knocks him out. He is now trapped under the rubble, unconscious, without the Spider-Man knowing he's there. Luckily, the church was closed that night due to renovations to the outer structure, hence why Miles felt comfortable smashing into it without worrying about hurting innocent people. In a cutscene, Miles' other gadgets malfunction when he tries to use them, causing sparks to cause a fire on the inside of the bell tower as the fight continues. Miles continuously rings the bells, causing the symbiote to slowly lose control over its host. The fire also helps boxing Peter in a tighter space, until Peter finally collapses on his knees and starts screaming, trying to rip off the symbiote. However, the church's bells are quite weaker than the engineered Sonic Burst, so the symbiote puts up quite a fight. So Miles decides to once again slingshot into Peter at full force, ripping him out of the symbiote, and both of them falling down on the streets below, getting knocked out for a while. Meanwhile, the symbiote is trying to crawl away from the fire since it retained the Anti-Venom suit weakness to fire, so it slips through the cracks onto the rubble below, finding Eddie Brock just waking up just to see this black goo engulfing him and sticking to his face. He screams as the rubble keeps falling on top of him. The scream slowly turns into an all too familiar growl. A buffed up Eddie, in a still undefined and slithering symbiotic outer layer, bursts out of the rubble and escapes from the fire by the back alley exit into the night, totally unaware that the Spider-Men were laying powerless on the next street. Our heroes wake up and go back to find the symbiote and contain it, but all they find are traces of it burning in the fire, before the rest of the tower collapses. They stick around until the last ember is put out and tries to find if there's any traces of the symbiote left. They assume it was destroyed in the fire, since there is no trace of it anywhere, and there was nobody found alive nor dead inside the church. Uneasy but pretty convinced, our heroes go back home. Miles is still weakened from the symbiote and still can't use his Venom abilities, and decides to join his mom Rio and her boyfriend Albert Moon on a vacation they were planning out of the city. Cindy was already going with them, so this just feels right to spend some quality time with his mom and the newest addition to the family, while also recovering from the symbiote ordeal. Miles is reluctant to ask Peter, but he understands what Miles is going through, and reassures him that he got this covered, while he gets some well-deserved rest. EMF can wait for a couple of weeks, he says. It may be kinda cheap to reuse the one of the Spider-Man leaves the city for a while excuse they used in Miles Morales game, but I need a reason for Peter to be the only Spider-Man in New York for the next part, so we'll stick with that for now. And that concludes the second DLC. DLC 3. We Are Your Venom. The third and final DLC starts innocently enough. Peter does some missions as he gets used to being Spider-Man without the symbiote suit again. Gameplay-wise, the player can use the spider arm abilities or also choose to use the web-based abilities, similar to the one Miles has in this DLC that I explained in the part where Miles didn't have his electric powers. Basically, Insomniac could have the two Spider-Men share the same web-based abilities, or give them some kind of variation for each Spider-Man. However, since these are web-based attacks, I think it would be perfectly fine to have them be the same between the two Spider-Men. It's okay for them to have a common set of abilities, since they have similar powers and the same web shooters. Elsewhere, we see Eddie Brock vigorously training in his home, lifting weights and apparently talking to himself. Recalling the day that Spider-Man ruined his life, then the audacity of Peter to come to work and act surprised when he got fired, and try to look like he gave a damn about him. Eddie's hatred is more intense than ever. As he bench presses get faster and faster, Eddie's voice begins to morph into Todd's Venom voice, recalling Peter rejecting the symbiote and trying to destroy it multiple times. The symbiote and Brock bond over their shared hatred towards Spider-Man, forming the collective consciousness identifying themselves as Venom. The symbiote voice starts by talking in singular in a more growly voice than usual, stating to Eddie that it thought Peter was his perfect host and almost perished because of him, and also states that Eddie's life has also been poisoned by Spider-Man. Harry called the symbiote Venom to symbolize the use of minor traces of venom in medicine in order to create cures, and as a nod at the EMF's mission. But Peter rejected them, so now Eddie and the symbiote will become the poison in Peter's life. The sound of their voices eventually unite into the final Tony Todd Venom voice, saying that we are going to be like Venom to Spider-Man. We will get our vengeance. The symbiote fully engulfs Brock's body, forming the massive shape of Venom as he throws down the weights with such force that it breaks through the floor. Venom rushes out the window into the night. This slight over-explanation on why Harry called himself Venom is my attempt to make it just make some sort of sense, since Harry just calls himself Venom without explaining why in the story. The only reason I can see is since Norman tagged the symbiote sample as VNM followed by a dash and a series of numbers, because he was trying to cure his son with this venom, similar to how venom is used in medicine to find cures or create anti-venom. Also, this version of Venom doesn't have the spider symbol anymore. It's more similar to the Tom Hardy Venom design from the movie, and it's done so for a reason. It could be overlooked and just use the normal design, but we'll expand on this later on. But basically the idea is that the symbiote is mad at Peter for trying to destroy it, therefore he does not want to use his logo. At this point the player gets control of Venom, as he sets off to look for Spider-Man. Venom can encounter scattered hunters as well as random crimes that the player could intervene as Venom, killing the bad guys instead of webbing them to the walls. Gameplay-wise, Venom could use an expanded version of the main game controls by adding a couple more abilities and moves. Also, he can get a surge mode like Peter, where the tendrils would come out of his suit and act all crazy while having instant finishers and a more powerful moveset for a while. His finisher would involve killing the enemies obviously, but if the player saves up all 3 finishers and uses them on one enemy, Venom would bite their head off, regenerating his full health. I think they should not include the Null Wings as part of his moveset, but it might be an interesting idea for Eddie to use the symbiote tendrils as webs similar to Spider-Man, to grant more freedom of movement if they wanted to. They could also opt not to use web swinging, just to make him feel more unique and different to Spider-Man. They could add some more powerful and longer jumps, similar to how Hulk would jump across buildings in the comics. They could add either or both. I don't mind either idea, since they both fit the character in this universe. If they do add symbiote swinging, I just want the tendrils to be thicker, since Venom is a pretty big boy, so he needs some extra support to pull that off. This version of Venom is finally more accurate to the source material. It's not a mindless monster just doing the bidding of Null to invade the Earth. He's been cut off from the hive mind by merging with the Anti-Venom symbiote and corrupting it. He's weak to fire now, as well as high-frequency sounds. They create a personality with Eddie Brock being a willing participant, bonding over their deep hatred for Spider-Man, and just wants to cause him pain. Eddie is not necessarily an evil person, so he might step up and stop some crimes along the way. The focus of his rage is mainly Spider-Man, not innocent people. This leaves space for him to be redeemed in the future, if needed. Eventually, after a few missions with each character, you'll get forced to control Peter. But first, we get to see the Chameleon plotting against Spider-Man, out to avenge his fallen brother, Kraven. He doesn't really know that Venom and Spider-Man were two different people, so he just assumed it was Peter that killed him as Venom. He uses his tech to infiltrate the raft and free Rhino and various other dangerous prisoners and other minor villains on a boat. Rhino's rampage across the city grabs Peter's attention, so he chases him down. Eventually, Rhino stops next to the docks, and weirdly enough just stands there in front of Peter. Peter makes a few clever remarks and tries to convince Rhino to end this peacefully. That's when the Taskmaster appears out of nowhere, with the rest of the freed villains and prisoners trying to overwhelm Spider-Man. As Peter is busy with the fight, the Chameleon talks with Rhino and Taskmaster via an earpiece and tells them to kill him. Peter is visibly struggling without the power of the Anti-Venom suit, but he still tries to fight Rhino, Taskmaster, and the rest of the criminals all at once. But he is eventually overwhelmed and knocked into a building by Rhino. This is where the camera zooms out of the action and just shows the villains closing in on the unconscious Spider-Man. Enter Venom. Now we gain control of Venom and destroy most of the normal prisoners in a quick fight sequence. Venom bites the head off a random brute, slightly off camera of course, and shouts in a growly voice, "He's ours. Only we can hurt the itsy bitsy spider." Then he focuses on Rhino and the Taskmaster. We get a double boss fight using Venom this time. Hell yeah. Eventually, Venom gains the upper hand and knocks Rhino unconscious, holding him up by the neck with one hand while sticking to the wall. Taskmaster touches his earpiece and tells the Chameleon that "you don't pay me enough for this," and just uses a smoke bomb and vanishes. Venom stares at his defeated foe, but is distracted by Spider-Man moving rubble as he was waking up, so he just drops Rhino and heads towards Peter. We fight Peter as Venom and eventually beat him up so badly that he can't get up. Venom reveals to Spider-Man the same lines he was telling himself back at his apartment about the origin of his Venom name and Brock's new take on its meaning, as explained earlier on. Venom doesn't kill Peter yet. He says he wants him to suffer and just leaves him on the ground half dead. From now on, Peter has various side missions to do, trivial crimes and such, but with a twist. At the end, Venom shows up and we get a boss fight against him where he stalks Peter in the dark alleys. Like a sort of hide and seek with Venom where he jump scares the player out of nowhere and Peter needs to dodge to avoid damage just in the nick of time. This is done to indicate that Peter's spidey sense don't work against Venom due to their previous bond as the Anti-Venom suit. This makes Peter quite concerned as he could be anywhere. Throughout the rest of the DLC, Venom would invade Peter's private life, similar to the animated series. He'd meet Mary Jane and act like an old friend of Peter's, just to mess with him. He'd also stalk Miles' friends and uncle, sending selfies to Peter with Venom's grin and them in the background. He'd also visit Harry at the ER, video calling Peter and talking crap about how Harry was a crappy host and deserves to die, as Peter struggles to balance fighting crimes and being there to protect his loved ones from Venom. The game will have Peter do missions and then reacting to Venom's threats after finishing each one of them. Venom is now a menace for both Spider-Man and Peter's personal life. At some point in the story, they can introduce Cassidy again. Multiple people get kidnapped, including Eddie Brock's ex-wife, in order to try converting them into followers of the Flame. This could be the turning point for Venom. He would be torn between his hatred for Spider-Man and wanting to save the woman that he loves, despite her leaving him. This is where Eddie's Venom differs from Harry. The Symbiote and Eddie are both Venom, So the symbiote builds a relationship with this host and actually helps Eddie instead of trying to brainwash him into forsaking his ex-wife and dealing with Spider-Man. Both Peter and Venom work separately to deal with the Flame Spiromaniacs and stop the kidnappings. Sometimes they run into each other and have interesting double takedowns and dialogue during the fight, similar to the other vigilantes in the main game. Eventually, Peter decides to ask Venom to stop hunting him and let him help find his ex-wife, at least for the time being, as time is of the essence before Cassidy disappears again or something bad happens to her. At some point, Spider-Man also learns about the reason why Eddie hates him and tells him that he didn't mean to cause any harm, and he didn't even know about the fake Sin Eater. Eddie also realizes that Spider-Man wasn't set on destroying him, just trying to do the right thing. The symbiote also reveals to them more about the hive mind and the control it had over the symbiotes, since they were literally sent there to infect planets, and now the symbiote is starting to like this planet and his life with his new host. Overall, this is where the Lether Protectant version of Venom is born, and as Peter and Venom shake hands, Venom reintroduces the white spider symbol as a sign of respecting Spider-Man and his heroism. Peter doesn't really know about Venom's snackish tendencies when fighting bad guys, yet. In the end, they manage to stop the Flames operation and free the multitude of kidnapped civilians, including Brock's ex-wife. Eddie decides not to talk to her, since he's worried this could happen again or put her in danger, and maybe because he thinks she'd be scared of him as Venom. Unbeknownst to Peter, Wraith has been following their little adventure and managed to spot Cassidy escaping the fight Venom and Spider-Man were part of, so she followed him back to his base of operations. At this point, they could either use cutscenes or let the player control Wraith for this bit. Basically, the idea is that Wraith almost kills Cassidy, but she remembers a conversation she had with Peter about killing criminals and decides to let him live. Bloodied and disappointed in her, he starts laughing maniacally as he crawls up on a chair in his office. He tells her how disappointed he is that she didn't have what it takes to finish the job. "The spiders got to you," he says, "but now you must face the consequences." He pulls out a remote detonator from a drawer, and Wraith barely makes it out the window in time. Cassidy is seen badly injured from the explosion, next to the broken containment unit, as dark red tendrils reach out and stick on his bloody face. The camera cuts to black, and Cassidy's maniacal laughter can be heard, accompanied by the sound of symbiote tendrils slithering. The laughter slowly morphs into an awful, distorted Carnage laugh as the credits roll, setting up Carnage for the next game. During the credits, we get some scenes showing off Miles fighting some run-of-the-mill criminals with his electric powers, indicating that his powers are back to normal. Then we see Peter and MJ in a side-by-side shot of them working on EMF and MJ's podcast, respectively, as Peter is tinkering with his tech and MJ comments on Cassidy being at large. Venom is seen eating a full pizza on the top of the Empire State Building, as the symbiote is complaining to Brock about not being allowed to just eat some people, as they are far more nutritious. After the credits, we see a post-credit scene, further hinting at the next game's main plot and/or expanding on Cindy Moon's possible future as Silk in this universe. After finishing the DLC, we can now free roam as Miles, Peter, and Venom, and maybe they could even allow Wraith to stop some random crimes from time to time. And there we have it. This was probably my longest video ever, but I'm excited about sharing my thoughts on how Insomniac could redeem their adaptation of Venom and make a future game featuring the Lether Protector in this universe. I tried respecting the source material while still adapting a believable version of Eddie Brock's Venom that fits this universe, especially considering Venom's previous appearance as Harry in Spider-Man 2. I want to point out that I went for Eddie Brock having the Venom symbiote, but the story could just as easily be adapted using Eddie Brock as Anti-Venom, like in the comics. If I'm not mistaken, the creation of Brock's Anti-Venom form also included Martin Lee in the comics. Brock had cancer and Lee's powers cured him unknowingly. When the symbiote tries to bond with Eddie again after being cured, it notices that he became toxic to it, destroying it and forming a new Anti-Venom symbiote, from the remnants of the black symbiote merged with special antibodies produced by Brock's white blood cells infused with Lee's powers. I purely chose to keep the original Venom purely out of personal preference, but it could work just as well with the Anti-Venom symbiote, if not arguably even better from a story point of view. And one last note, I just hope that next time Sony gives Insomniac all the time they need to finish up the story without feeling the need to rush things. I don't know if they were rushed to release the game in 2023 by Sony instead of delaying it for early 2024, but that's certainly the feeling I got from experiencing, analyzing and comparing the game's 3 story acts. Act 1 is the most fleshed out. In the second act, you start to notice some cracks, mostly related to the pacing and the character development. And finally, the third act just feels a bit rushed, and Venom comes off as more of a monster controlling its host, rather than a bond between two sentient beings united by a common goal. Despite the game still having some flaws, I really enjoyed Spider-Man 2, and I had a great time experiencing the story and gameplay Insomniac created, and I can't wait for the next installment in this universe, be it DLC, a sequel or sidequel, or even other entries such as Wolverine, and hopefully other Marvel heroes. I'm here for it. And that's about it. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I'll catch you in my next one. See ya!